The night sky was pitch black, with only the faintest glimmers of stars piercing through the thick blanket of darkness. The passengers on Flight 666 were unaware that this would be a journey unlike any they had ever experienced. As the plane ascended into the night, a sudden and inexplicable silence fell over the cabin, chilling the air with an eerie sense of foreboding. Even the hum of the engines seemed distant, as if swallowed by an unseen force. The passengers exchanged uneasy glances, their cheerful chatter fading into whispers of uncertainty. At the heart of the plane, in seat 13A, sat a man who no one remembered boarding. His presence was unsettling. An air of wrongness clung to him like a shadow. His face, pale and drawn, was obscured by the brim of a worn-out hat, and his eyes, if anyone dared to look, seemed hollow, void of life. Captain Roberts had flown this route 100 times before, but something about tonight felt off. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone, that something sinister was lurking just beyond his field of vision. In the cockpit, the instruments flickered for a moment, the lights dimming before returning to normal. "Did you see that?" First Officer Davis asked, his voice tense. "Just a glitch," Roberts replied, though his grip tightened on the controls. But deep down, he knew this was no ordinary glitch. Meanwhile, in the cabin, the flight attendants began their rounds, offering refreshments with forced smiles. As one attendant, Maria, approached row 13, she noticed the man in seat 13A for the first time. A chill ran down her spine as she tried to recall if she had seen him during boarding. But her memory was blank. The passenger didn't respond to her offer of drinks, simply staring ahead with an intensity that made her heart race. It wasn't long before strange occurrences began to spread throughout the plane. Passengers started to complain about sudden cold drafts, the lights flickering overhead, and an overwhelming feeling of being watched. One by one, those seated near 13A began to fall silent, their faces drained of color, as if the life was being sucked out of them. The whispers grew louder, murmurs of a curse, of something unholy that had taken hold of the plane. Maria couldn't shake the unease she felt every time she passed row 13. The other attendants, too, were on edge, their usual routines disrupted by the strange occurrences. The once mundane flight was quickly turning into a nightmare. As the hours dragged on, the man in 13A remained eerily still. Finally, unable to bear the tension any longer, a passenger seated across the aisle leaned over to ask if he was okay. But as soon as the words left his mouth, the man's head snapped up, and for the first time, everyone in the vicinity saw his face clearly. His eyes were not merely hollow, they were black voids, endless and consuming. The passenger recoiled in horror, his heart pounding as the man in 13A slowly turned his head to stare directly at him. A scream tore through the cabin, sending a wave of panic among the passengers. The man in 13A had vanished, leaving behind only the chilling memory of those empty eyes. Captain Roberts was alerted to the chaos in the cabin, but found himself powerless to help. The controls had begun to malfunction, responding sluggishly to his commands. The plane seemed to have a mind of its own, and it was leading them straight into the heart of a storm that had materialized out of nowhere. Back in the cabin, the lights flickered again, plunging the passengers into darkness. When they came back on, several passengers found themselves seated next to the ghostly figure of 13A. His presence now felt throughout the plane. His eyes, those terrifying voids, locked onto each of them, instilling a fear so profound it left them paralyzed. The whispers among the passengers turned into cries of terror as the plane shuddered violently, the storm outside mirroring the chaos within. Maria, trembling with fear, tried to comfort those around her, but the fear was infectious, spreading like wildfire through the cabin. As the plane hurtled through the storm, Captain Roberts desperately tried to regain control, but it was as if the plane was fighting against him, resisting every attempt to steady their course. Then, just as he was about to lose hope, a voice crackled over the intercom, a voice that didn't belong to anyone on the flight. Flight 666. You have entered the realm of the damned. The voice was deep, resonating with a malevolence that sent shivers down everyone's spine. The passengers looked around in panic, but no one knew where the voice had come from. It continued, speaking of sins unforgiven, of debts that must be paid. And as the voice spoke, the phantom passenger appeared in multiple seats, his dark eyes staring into the souls of those who dared to meet his gaze. It was then that Maria, desperate for answers, recalled a story she had heard long ago. Flight 666 was rumored to be cursed, a plane that had once crashed under mysterious circumstances, its passengers never found. The plane was said to reappear every few years, with a new crew and new passengers, all doomed to suffer the same fate as those before them. Her heart raced as she realized the truth. They were aboard the ghost plane, trapped in a never-ending cycle of terror. The phantom passenger was not just a ghost. He was a harbinger of doom, a soul bound to the plane, seeking revenge on the living. As the storm outside intensified, Captain Roberts made a decision. He had to end this, for the sake of everyone on board. Ignoring the screams and the chaos behind him, he pushed the plane into a steep dive, hoping the sudden maneuver would shake off whatever had taken hold of them. But as the plane descended, the phantom passenger appeared in the cockpit, his presence suffocating. "You cannot escape," the voice hissed, the words wrapping around Roberts like chains. The captain's vision blurred, his hands shaking as he fought to keep control. But just as all hope seemed lost, a sudden clarity washed over him. He remembered the stories, the legends of how the original crew had tried to save their plane but failed because they didn't know the truth. The only way to break the curse was to acknowledge the sins of the past, to seek forgiveness for the wrongs that had been done. With a surge of strength, Roberts spoke into the intercom, his voice firm. "To those who suffered on this plane before us, we acknowledge your pain, your suffering. We seek forgiveness for the sins of the past, for the lives lost. We ask for mercy, for the chance to return to the world of the living." The plane trembled, the storm outside raging even harder as if resisting his plea. But Roberts continued, pouring his heart into the words, begging for the lives of his crew and passengers. Slowly, the presence of the phantom passenger began to fade, his dark eyes losing their power. The storm outside began to calm, the controls responding once more to Roberts' touch. As the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, Flight 666 emerged from the storm, battered but intact. The passengers, though shaken, were alive, their ordeal over. But as the plane made its final approach, Maria noticed something chilling. Seat 13A was empty, yet a single old-fashioned hat lay on the seat, a reminder of the horror they had just survived. Captain Roberts brought the plane in for a safe landing, the runway below a welcome sight after the night of terror. But as the plane taxied to the gate, he couldn't help but glance at the passenger list. Seat 13A had never been assigned. The passengers disembarked, their faces pale, their bodies trembling with the memories of what had happened. And as the last passenger left the plane, the door to the cockpit closed on its own, a final whisper of the phantom passenger lingering in the air. Weeks later, a new crew prepared to take Flight 666 on its next journey. The plane had been checked, the passengers boarded, and everything seemed normal. But as the plane lifted off, a shadow passed through the cabin, unnoticed by all but one, a young flight attendant who paused, her eyes catching sight of something in seat 13A. A man sat there, his face obscured by the brim of an old hat, his eyes hidden in shadow. She blinked, and he was gone. Flight 666 ascended into the sky, the night closing in around it. And somewhere in the darkness, the phantom passenger waited, his curse not yet fulfilled.